history of the building, a little bit more in depth than what John had provided, because
I'm going to read every page.
I'm gonna call these hours, not minutes.
Okay, D. Morris, 39 Russell Street, Fulton Heights, way up at the top of the hill. I do historical work in Medford, Malden, Melrose, Stoneham, Arlington, Mount Auburn Cemetery, and Forest Hill Cemetery, and I've done this for over 20 years. So, and I write books. So I'm very interested in history. Ryan brought to my attention the whole situation at 6 Rockwell, and that fascinated me because I find a lot in East Medford called Glenwood has not really been explored. I know we have the Tufts House, which is wonderful, but other aspects to Glenwood have, well, they haven't been ignored, they've just been passed over. And some of that is because what I came up with about Rockwell Ave and that area in general was how it was influenced by French Canadians. And part of that reason they got, today they somewhat ignored, is that their assimilation into Medford was so successful. They fit right into the community, they moved here, they raised their kids here, they stayed here. And so this brave little group of French Canadians working in the factories, Mystic, Print and Dye Works, the brickyards, very much so, they're a success story. So I said, French Canadians, really? So I went to one of the Medford Bibles, otherwise known as Medford on the Mystic, the Seaberg book, and I said, okay, brickyards. They got a whole thing here on brickyards, really nice. And they do talk about kilns and clay, making bricks in Medford, very, very nice. And they talk about the migrants, the French Canadian migrants. And I said, well, wait a minute. If they're migrants, that's a little opposite to people settling here. So I decided, no offense, Mrs. Seaberg, but let me see what else I can find. Yes, there were migrant workers who came here for a time because a lot of the homes around Rockwell, Hall Street, Riverside, took in boarders. Many of those boarders, French Canadians, working in the brickyards, the print works, the rubber factory, the woolen factory, and then they moved on. So yes, migrants, but there were people here for the long haul. So I will have pretty pictures to show you, but first. Canada. Why it impacted East Medford? People liked it. Many people in the gossip columns of the Medford Mercury, listings time after time in the summer. So-and-so from Otis Street, from Spring Street, wherever street. Oh, they went to Canada for vacation. It wasn't that far away, it was a train ride away. It was foreign, but not too foreign. So it was comfortable. So French Canadian folk coming in here, it depended on who you were. You could be from Nova Scotia, you could be from Quebec, and then you're French speaking. So that was something of a challenge, how are people going to fit in? And many of them, of course, were Catholic. So you have that emphasis. So I decided to walk around Glenwood and see traces of this whole French Canadian thing. Well, not so much. The Glenwood Railroad Station is gone. The James School, where many people went to school, the kids, that's gone. St. James Church on the Fellsway, where they attended, that's gone. Immaculate Conception is now in Malden, so to speak, so that's not Medford, all right. Many of the factories are gone, well, thank God. So that's a good aspect to the brick making, the chemicals, the whole 9 yards. So that's not, I wouldn't want to have the print and dye work set up shop again on the marsh. So that whole livelihood factor is gone, and it's either shopping center, auto repair, going down Linden or Locust or whatever.
Lake Street.
Yeah.
Lake Street's got.
Yeah, it's,
A few of the old boarding houses are still on
the
Lake Street.
there are still some, yes, I found
Factories
some of them,
that
so
were
that
boarding.
was all very interesting. But I thought, I said to people I know on Riverside, I said, what about the French Canadians? And they said, what about them? Because this is not known. And this is part of our legacy, because we know the shipbuilding has been immortalized, and it should be. And then there's a drop off the cliff because the French Canadians came in right after the shipbuilding in 1872. A lot of these folks came to East Medford in the 1880s, 90s, and turn of the century. So they're the progression of East Medford is with your French Canadians in a lot of ways. Now it's time to hand you a packet. You'll like this. So if you could do that, thank you. So I went to the registry and I got out a really neat 1902 plan of Rockwell Avenue. Yes, because Rockwell Avenue is a little dead end, and I figured, no, there's not going to be anything at the registry, but here we go. And what is so wonderful, you have this 6 Rockwell, the Carbonneau house, and then the listing of Dion, Pepin, Center actually is French-Canadian background, and Blaze, and then you have others down the back end of the street, it became Italian as time passed, but you have a whole little nest of French-Canadian folk who worked together, often went to the same church, and had horses that ran at the combination park or whatever. So I thought, this is great, and it's right in, close proximity to the Peter Tufts house. So you've got the idea of sort of a natural vignette going on here. We've shipbuilding, Peter Tufts house, and now you've got this whole little French-Canadian neighborhood. Okay, we took a look at I went to the Boston Globe again in the Bible, and I started looking up obits, because what do people say about so-and-so? And several of them, here's 2 examples. Mrs. Emma Shortsleeves, 1910, passes away. She's a widow, blah, blah, blah. She was a well-known resident of the French district of Glenwood. Yes, I found that. Oh, is that so wonderful? And she's not French or Canadian, but that's okay, because if this is being written up in the Globe as a French district, people knew about it. This wasn't carefully hidden or under a bushel basket. Then George O. Dion, he's the next door neighbor to the Carbonneaus. He passes away in 1917, a well-known resident of the French colony in the Brickyard district. So I said, aha, these folks had a presence here in Medford. So if you read about them, and they were known as part of the French colony, the French district, nobody in West Medford would say, well, where the hell is that? You would know that this is where this neighborhood was. So that's a great, I have other documents on that, but that gives you a taste. Then 1889 is a map, and it shows Linden and Locust Street, Rockwell Ave, the Tufts house, and here's the Mystic Print and Dye Works. So it's in the hood, and you just walk over to your work because it's convenient. And you're skilled, you're a laborer, but you're not just a laborer, you're actually a skilled laborer, working in several plants such as the Print and Dye Works and Mass Brickyards.
No, we have our, no, I don't think we have that one.
We had mentioned 100.
I didn't put it in? This?
Oh, no.
Oh, it's the other one, okay. But, Brickyards, that will go with it, but you've got the factories there, which, of course, as time went on, were not totally wholesome, to say the least, and poisoned the ground, etc. So we're not trying to make this into a Sturbridge Village type of thing. Let's bring back the factories. Now, okay, what do you have next?
1900?
Yep, so you have the brickyards there and their factories, their whole setups. Then I went to the library, our treasured library, and there's this fabulous book, Mary Emma and Company. Because I had Google book search things about Glenwood, French Canadian, and this book, written by a Ralph Moody, he was very, very popular in the 1960s, 70s. He was writing cowboy stories because his family had gone out to Colorado and then came back here, settled in Medford because his mother had become a widow, she needed to make money, she brought the family back here, and this whole entire book is about Glenwood. Oh my God, couldn't believe it. So, what I have here, that you do have, I can see the picture, okay, here's Pop Watson, who was one of the main characters in this book. that Ralph Moody knew, because Ralph Moody was just a kid going to the Franklin School on Central Ave. And he deals with Cop Watson from Riverside. And, oh, it's even in Cop Watson's accent, some of his speeches, it's wonderful. Cop Watson is like your ideal policeman, he's what every cop should be today. He deals with the kids, especially Ralph Moody, who was a truant many times. And so he sort of set him on the straight path. So I gave you a few quotes there to get a sense of Cop Watson and his interaction. And what was absolutely wonderful is Cop Watson's daughter married Leon Carbonneau of 6 Rockwell Ave, who was the son of Stanislaus Carbonneau. So you get that kind of wonderful interaction there. And going further in the book, we have this picture, which talks about, because this is unknown history to much of Medford, using the clay pits as sledding. Yeah, because in the moonlight, the clay pit was even more beautiful than it had been in the daylight. Who knew that this was not regarded as a wasteland, that this was a neighborhood playground in many respects? That once a factory would burn down, the kids wanted to figure out how to float some of the timbers of the factory down the Mystic so they could bring them home and cut them up for firewood. And Cop Watson told them how to do it. So it's a sudden introduction into a way of life that we had no knowledge of, plus they're middle class. And since I'm middle class, and people I know are middle class, I want the middle class recognized. And no offense to Brooks Estate, but I'm tired of history about the rich white guys. So, and I want the Brooks Estate to thrive and prosper.
I'm not one of them.
No, I want it to prosper. But what our civic ancestors of the working middle class, who came in as immigrants, thank you Donald Trump for putting this to the fore, but bring in the French Canadians, because nobody really knows about them. Mr. Siegel even thinks they're just migrants. They settled here, raised their kids, and had a history, and here's the whole. I would love to have sections of this being read by 5th, 6th, 7th graders. I think they'd love it. Love it, because what do you mean marshes? What do you mean going out and digging clams out of marshes and having them for lunch? Nobody knows this. I was astounded. I could not put this thing down. It's so good. And I said to the librarians, oh yeah, we know about that. And it's also upstairs in the local history collection. I said, that's great, but what about, why don't we market this? And I want to get selections into the schools, because I think this would be great local history. And it's also written by a guy who's a kid, and here in Medford, so this talks a lot about growing up here, how he had to deal with really grinding poverty, how his mom set up a laundry on Spring Street, and really did very well, the Sunshine Laundry. Can you help it with that name, the Sunshine Laundry? Where she put in laundry of ladies from the Unitarian Church. So it gives you an entirely different view, the whole Carbonneau thing. He also, this guy was friends with the Dions next door. You know, so you've got a lot of potential interchange, you've got vignettes, you've got houses. I'm tired of seeing a plaque about what was at a place. This was the site.
And it's like,
so
nobody's been in there, it's like a time capsule inside that.
Exactly, that's what
structure.
Ryan was
Unbelievable.
talking about, and I thought how splendid that was. Now, again, I'm not looking for Sturbridge Village, I'm not, but I wanted to bring to your attention this whole concept of our legacy. Because this whole middle classdom and the French Canadians, they're part of us. And if we want to be remembered, we better do a favor to the people who came before us.
Let me ask a question to you.
Yeah.
You're providing a larger social context for this neighborhood
Yes.
with this work, which is greatly appreciated, by the way. Does this mean that we should revisit the Form B and the way we're thinking about this?
I think
What are you recommending the next
Yeah,
step be?
because I had no clue. Because Ryan said, we met, and he said, this is Rockwell thing, and I said, okay, well, I want to look at that. And I said, I didn't know there was a Rockwell Ave. And I want to look at this, and Carbonneau, and they're French Canadian. I said, really? So this sort of set, well, here we go. I'm going to read this whole thing to you. No, but this, I started in, what I do when I do research is I throw out the net. I don't make decisions about anything, because if you go, I'm going to look at only Canadians who had red hair, well, then you dismiss everybody else. So I threw out the net, and we talked again, and it was more and more information. I said, nobody knows about this community. And then what sold me were the obituaries. If the Globe is talking about the French colony, and not in quotes, not strangeness, not anything. So then I met with Alex Rubenthal from the paper, and I threw this stuff at him. And he said, yeah, let's do something. So something is going to be coming out at the end of January.
Cool.
About demolition delay, about finding new neighborhoods, new aspects, new this, new that. Then, I know Larry Sands, this sounds like a non sequitur. The Oaks house, where his mom grew up on Riverside, she was a Brousseau, she married a Sands, she was French Canadian. I said, really? And part of that's Anheuser-Busch area? This house was moved, and here he is, a retired fire captain who's passionate about history. And so I'm meeting with him tomorrow about French Canadians and his mom and pictures and things like that. So, and then
Smile with the camera.
Hi.
Ryan found John, whose relatives.
My great-great-grandfather was Cop Watson, Charles Watson.
Okay, so you ready? I had to
And
build to this.
I'm a Medford police officer also.
Civic.
Been for a police officer for 32
We
years.
need, I think for Dee's next speech, we need you to show up dressed like that.
Yeah.
Oh, I say.
I would love
He'll do
to.
it, he'll do it.
You need one that's
So-
the nicest hat, we can find
Is
one.
it wonderful?
My great-great-grandfather, or the other one, is Stanislaus Carbonneau.
Oh,
And
what do you think?
my great-grandfather, Leonidas Carbonneau, married Charlie Watson's daughter, Gertrude Watson. They were my mother's grandparents. And my grandfather was Leon Carbonneau. My mother was Jean Carbonneau. She just passed away last July, unfortunately. She read this book, Mary Emmer and Company, back in the 1980s. My mother did. And photocopied the pages that mention Cop Watson. He's mentioned actually throughout that book. And I
yeah.
had seen that previously, but I didn't realize how involved it was. I was talking to Ryan, and Ryan brought up, I knew right away what book he was talking about. He said, it's on Amazon. I said, okay, I got it. And when Dee tells you that it's a great book, it's fantastic. I could not put it down. And I'm not really a book reader either. I mean, I literally shut the TV off at night and just sat back in my recliner and went cover to cover in it. Fabulous look back in time to the turn of the century Medford.
John, when did you learn of all this history and your connection?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I knew about the Carbonneaus and the Carbonneau house. My mother used to go to 6 Rockwell Ave. She recalls, my mother had a fantastic memory even for her age. She was 84 when she died, but she could tell you what she wore to church 60 years ago on September 1st. Phenomenal memory. So she told me about how she remembered sitting on her great-grandfather's lap, who was Stanislaus Carbonneau, the original owner of 6 Rockwell Ave, in that house, and that he didn't speak much English and that he smoked a pipe, and she said she could still remember the smell of the cherry tobacco in the pipe. So the stories that she had, and she used to go there and sit on the porch and look across the street at what is now the projects, Laprise Village, and it was pasture land, and there were cows grazing in that pasture, and she told me about that. And the Watsons lived at 244 Riverside Ave, and my mother frequented there as well. Her grandmother, Gertrude Watson, lived there, and Charlie Watson, but he died in 1930. He was actually on the job on the police department about 40 years, 1890 to 1930. and he was in charge of street lamp lighting before that. He was born in Newton I'm going back a little further now, but to James Otis Watson, who was from Sandwich, New Hampshire, and to an Irish mother, Mary McGuire. And he came over here to Medford, made his life. His daughter, Gertrude, was the only child that he had that was not born in Medford. She was born in Newton, but lived here, my great-grandmother. And that family line goes back almost 400 years in Massachusetts, through the Revolutionary War and to Governor Thomas Dudley, the second colonial governor. I am a member of the Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Empire State Societies of the Sons of the American Revolution. My mother was a DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution, and my daughter is also. So that's just a little history on the family. But yeah, so we're still here. I grew up in Medford. I graduated Medford High School in 1980, and just kind of, I'm very into history, I always have been. The way I stumbled across Cop Watson was when I was graduating for the police academy here. My mother's aunt, who I was very close with, that was Gertrude Watson's daughter, was at my graduation. My grandfather passed away in 1964. I never knew him, out in California, Lee and Carbonneau. But my aunt, whose name was Gertrude Carbonneau, but we called her Auntie Lovey, yeah, fantastic person too. She had a great sense of humor, and she had me by the arm that day, and she looked at me just casually. This is in 1986. She says, "My grandfather would be so proud of you today."
Oh, that's wonderful.
And I looked at her and I said, because she was elderly, I said, "Your grandfather? How?" She said, "Oh, he was a Medford cop." She said he used to walk the beat down Riverside Ave, and he'd swing his stick, and he's actually described doing that in that book.
Yes.
The way they used to twirl it on the leather strap, you know? And so after she told me that, I was curious. So, and I've always had a love for history. So I went to the library. Now, mind you, this is 1986. There's no internet. First stop was when I went to the police station. I went into the clerk's office, and I said, "Do you have a file on every officer that ever worked here?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Could you look up Charles Watson?" And they pulled it out, and there's a folder, and it's just one piece of paper. It's nondescript, just has his name, address, but date of birth, things that are important, date of death, his revolving number, things like that. So I had his date of death, and with that, I went to the library, and I pulled the microfilm for the Medford paper for the week that he died. And there was a big splash in there on the front page, how he was the oldest patrolman on the force and in charge of the station during the day shift in his last years, and about the street lamp lighting and all of that. So I photocopied all that and held on to it. And then probably about 5 years ago or so, I started thinking more about it. And my parents were getting elderly and declining, and I just started thinking about, I'd like to know more about my mother's side of the family, because I really didn't know a whole lot other than those little snippets. So I started diving into it, and what I found was just absolutely amazing, going back through Charles Watson's line, because I figured he's got an English name. He's born in 1856 in Newton. Family might have been here a while. They certainly were. They came going back to the Arbella on the Winthrop fleet. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And then I just kind of, all of a sudden, I'm surfing Facebook one night, and I see a picture of my great-grandfather's house on 6 Rockwell Ave. I said, so
Exact words. That's my house.
I
6 Rockwell Ave.
shot Ryan a message. I said, "What's going on?" And we just started, and since I've been talking to him, we've been sharing information back and forth, and it's just been pretty incredible.
So where does this go in terms of the information being either finding it? You obviously you said you cast a much wider net.
Oh, yeah.
I want to see if some of this can be at least memorialized in the
Oh,
form we
absolutely.
have,
Yeah,
which will help at least